Good afternoon and welcome to our last Hawkeye Parent and Family webinar of this academic school year. My name is Lisa Kelly and I work in the Office of Academic Support and Retention, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. If you're unfamiliar with our webinars, they're hosted on the first Friday of each month from noon to 1 p.m. We hope that each one provides you with up-to-date information that may apply to your students' transition to the University of Iowa. We know that parent and family members play a vital role in student success, and we hope that these webinars provide a platform for us to provide you with resources that help you support your student in their success. If you can't attend every live webinar, we do record and post them later on both our website and on YouTube. For more information, future topics, or to sign up for webinars, please visit parents.uiowa.edu and click on the Resources tab. Each webinar has a short presentation and then a question and answer portion, where you can get your questions answered by our campus experts. Today's webinar is Managing the Summer Transition. With the end of the school year approaching, it's a good time to talk about this topic. We're very lucky to have a wonderful campus partner with us today, Dr. Barry Schreier, Director of our University Counseling Service and Professor of Counseling Psychology. He will share information on how to support your student as they transition through the summer. Turn it over to Barry.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome to the webinar this afternoon. Pleased to be here. So the topic for our day is transitions. And what we know is that transitions are indeed hard. We're often dealing with our students being away for a long time and then they are coming back. So what we'd like to say is that your child originally left as a child and is returning as an increasingly independent and sometimes painfully free-thinking adult. And you may struggle to support as well as separate from your child each time they go to school and then each time as they come home. And there's a psychological term for this, and it's called separation and individuation. And this describes the process that occurs between children and parents. The phenomenon does create complications each time your child returns home over breaks, especially a long break like summer, when everyone sort of falls back into the old dance steps and the old rules and expectations. And though our children do separate from us and become their own individual, they also return at times to the nest. And so their separation and return is a good thing, even if it feels like you may be going nuts with their contradictory and simultaneous demands for freedom and attention. So this can lead to what we've started to talk about, which is different expectations, sometimes maybe even opposite expectations. There are challenges to schedules, and often new norms need to be established. So let's talk a little bit about what your students might be actually fretting about. So being back home means going back to old rules. Your student's been on campus sort of under their own schedule for a long time, kind of doing as they see fit, to now basically living back under your house rules. Coming back home also can mean that people will likely feel like they're being judged for how long they decide to stay in bed or when they want to stay up late. And people look at them as being lazy or overly tired. And so on. Back home can also feel like to your students that there's a lot of obligation, like being asked to go somewhere, go visit your grandmother, or why aren't you staying home and spending time with your little brother or sister? And so the issue about middle ground then surfaces, about that middle ground between independence and feeling like you are under house arrest and have to wear an ankle bracelet and someone's tracking your every movement. Back home can also mean feeling like you have to ask someone if they can come over, where your students, when they're on campus, kind of just visit and go to places and have people come over wherever they want, and now they have to ask for permission again, perhaps. Back home means their friends may be far away, and so loneliness and boredom can come up, especially if friends from home aren't back home. And then back home can also mean that question of like, what are you doing with your life? Everybody asks, how did school go? How are grades? What are you doing with your life? What's next? And your students can often feel like, I just finished an entire year. I just came off of finals, and people are already asking me what's next. And then there's that slightly painful, more rarefied level, which is my parents still treat me like a child. My parents are always telling me what to do. My parents are always getting into my business, and so on and so on. And so our very independent children that sort of manage themselves for an entire year on campus come back, and they seem like big whiny babies to us. So there are those sorts of things. And again, the idea of separation and individuation does come up for us. So, what to do about this? Actually, I was going to say one other thing. No, I think that's it. So, what to do about this? So, advice. Well, advice is this. Talk with them about coming home. Sometimes what happens is there's an independent kind of just assumption that we all kind of know what we're all supposed to be doing, and that's often not the case. So as awkward and sort of maybe artificial as it might seem, we do suggest, why don't you talk with them about coming home? Ask about family expectations, talk to them about their new adult role, negotiate rules. We often say house rules should be for poker only, but there often are house rules. And so you will want to give a thought as a parent as to what are the non-negotiables? What do you think, like, there's no question, you know what? When you're at school, it's out of sight, out of mind. You can do whatever you want. But once you're back in the house, we worry about you again. And so we would really like for you to call us and let us know when you're going to be home so we don't worry, even if we didn't worry about you through the entire spring semester, per se. So decide which rules are negotiable and which ones are non-negotiable. And you might decide a negotiable one is, well, go out and do whatever you want. You know, it's your life. You can do whatever you want in the evening, except every Sunday we want you to be home. So those kinds of things. Talk about planning. Students sometimes will struggle about keeping themselves self-entertained. They will struggle a little bit between how to divide their time between family and friends and self and little siblings and grandparents and the neighbors and everybody that may want to catch up with them. So talk with them about planning. They may just seemingly get frustrated. And what they may really need from you is maybe your proactive approach around planning. Be creative. Change the way you deal with problems. I think we often sort of, an 18-year-old comes home and we still see that little 5-year-old and how we used to deal with them around things. So don't try to change or control family members. Try to find common ground with people who are different from them. Again, choose your battles carefully. Know when to call a truce. Know when to take time out. Know when to get when things get stressful. And remember that they've changed. They are not the same person that left the house a month ago, a semester ago, a year ago. And that can be a really hard transitional challenge for parents, is to remind yourself they've had a lot of things happen to them and they've made a lot of adjustments to adjust to their environment. And when they come home, they're truly not the same person. Try to communicate more effectively with the family. Share information about things that are different at home. Express your feelings appropriately. It's easy to get sort of tense and stressed and if tempers flare. Again, there are limits you can set. They're still your child. It's still your home. You can set limits, but know your limits as well. Listen before speaking. Your students often have lots of really big things. Professors and instructors and everybody are always asking them, what do you think? How do you feel about this? What's your opinion about this? And they're being pressed to really exert themselves and extend themselves. And then when they come home, we just want to tell them what to do. And they're not used to that. So listen before speaking, think before you're speaking, and be respectful of them. They are at a university to develop their own sense of identities and their own opinions about things. And then take time to process and share your experience with someone you trust. Sometimes you just need to get out of your house and go talk to your neighbor about what's going on. Or you need to call your best friend, or maybe you need to call your parent and have these conversations. So these are some advice things that we do offer. So, are you ready? Are you ready to have your kid home? Well, they're coming whether you are ready or not. So it's a bit of a rhetorical question, but the idea of asking the rhetorical question, are you ready, is we do kind of think about things like, be okay with maybe you have mixed feelings. This is a both and situation. Just because you're excited doesn't mean you can't also feel a little bit of dread. And just because you're feeling a little bit of dread doesn't mean you can't also feel some excitement. You can have both of those feelings towards your kids, and it doesn't mean you're a terrible, awful, rotten parent. It probably means you're having a pretty reasonable expectation and response to the change that's coming to your home. So you might want to discuss how long of a window your kid gets to decompress, right? Which is they come home, they can sort of throw their laundry on the floor and raid the refrigerator and lay in bed for a couple of days before you start nagging them, right? So you might want to make a favorite food to sort of help them sort of make the transition. You might want to sit down that first night and just kind of maybe watch Netflix together if you have Netflix, or just watch a movie. And again, honor that things have changed this past year. Each of you have grown. You've changed as well. And your kid may come home and wonder, like, what's the deal with you? But allow that decompression window, those first few days of sort of like everybody kind of having truce and détente, and we're sort of all engaging each other on our most favorite things. Often our little 18 and 19-year-olds need to go through a period of distancing. And again, I talked about separation and individuation. And this may be a time where they just need to sort of shake off kind of the expectations they had while they were at school to figure out how to reconnect with you all on their terms as well as your own. There's an often need for them to recreate themselves and how they fit with the family. And again, they may be shaking off the role that they had on campus to really take back on the role that they have at home. And so there's a process that happens, and to be patient. We often say, have bottomless patience for each other if you can. Because what happens is if I'm patient with you, then they're going to be patient back. When I'm impatient with you, then you're probably going to be impatient back. And last, or additionally, when your kid last lived with you, it was probably like under those high school kinds of rules. But now again, your student has been on their own for a year, and they're going to come home and expect to operate in a somewhat independent manner. And again, we talk about the idea that house rules are for poker. So understand from this point on, your relationship with your child will work best if it's based on mutual respect rather than control. Allow your children to become adults with you, if you will. And it's going to be hard for them and it's going to be hard for you. But if you can allow your child to become an adult with you, then things typically go well. And sure, there can be my rules, my house, my rules, such as like curfews. But again, this can be a major point of unnecessary contention that can ruin the time home. So absolutes are best replaced with what we call standards of consideration. It's considerate to simply be informed where you're going to be, where your child will be, than to demand they return home at a certain time. So rather than having absolute rules, which again is for poker, you might want to have what we call standards of consideration. Things that you would like your kid to consider and the reason you want them to consider that. So it's time to think about how to make your summer living arrangements livable and maybe even pleasurable. So we hope these tips were helpful to you for your consideration. So we want to offer you 5 questions that you can ask yourself as you start thinking about, oh yes, I'm parenting a young adult. So here are some questions. First, are my parenting strategies moving towards independence? Are you allowing your student to move towards greater sense of their own independence? Are your parenting strategies allowing for the balance between freedom and responsibility? Certainly, there may be things you want your student to be responsible for while they're home, while also allowing the balance of their freedom. Are your parent strategies motivated primarily by love or fear? And it's an interesting way to sort of separate those out, like those are 2 separate things that have nothing to do with each other, but they really are sort of the same. They are different sides of the same coin. Often we hold fear because we so love our children and we worry about them getting hurt. But again, the idea that if they are moving towards independence and you're trying to balance freedom from responsibility, it may be a bit of a test for you to have to sort of tolerate your own fear and trust out of love that they will continue to manage themselves while they're under your own roof like they did the entire previous year while they were on campus. Are your parent strategies providing guidance without enabling? Can you offer advice without giving too much permissiveness that allows them maybe to engage in behavior that you frankly just don't approve of? And then finally, are your parent strategies part of an ongoing dialogue? Be careful not to foreclose, right? I have spoken and that is the way it is. I am the head of this household. This is my house. And what we do is we foreclose conversation. But can we have a conversation with our kids, our young adult kids while they're home, where we didn't get to a conclusion, but we're gonna continue to talk about this. So rather than foreclosing, which tends to lead to a lot of difficulty, can you begin the conversations and allow it to be an ongoing dialogue? So these are 5 questions for you to ask yourself if you're parenting on your own or you're parenting with another parent, and if the latter is the case, for the 2 of you to sit down and have that discussion. So there are the first few days home. All right, we've warned you. We've probably given you a little fear about getting prepared for that. But there are some things to think about. Let them sleep when they first get home, as much as they want to. They often, especially in the aftermath of finals, are highly sleep deprived. Sleep deprivation is a critical mental health concern on our campus, as it is every campus. And so it is not unusual for students to come home and feel sleep deprived from dorm living, late nights, just a lot of noise, and again, the demand of finals and pulling late nights. And they're going to be a little cranky, depending on how they thought their finals went. And so letting them sleep and decompress, as we talked about earlier, can really be a really nice gift for you to give them initially. Staying out to the wee hours of the morning sounds awful to adults. I know it does to me at age 53, who have to get up early the next day and go to work. But that may be very normal college life where your student maybe didn't have their first class until 11 o'clock or noon on a given day, or they had no classes on a given day. And so their hours may be what we call the third shift, which is they're out of bed at 11 o'clock and they're staying up till 1 or 2 in the morning. Have lots of good food in the house. Food is love. There's no question about it. We all know that. Food is love. And you know this is 100 times better than the stuff they eat at college. Ramen noodles can only get so far on that, so some good home cooking can be really some good leverage on your part to help them. If you can slide food under the door, especially during the first few days, that's so much better, kind of like we do in prison. We slide food under the door, and your kid may sort of imprison themselves in the room. Fresh baked goods are good as well. And then we talk about the old grab and go phenomenon. The old grab and go phenomenon is your student wakes up, grabs food, and goes. And just to allow that, they too need to get reoriented to their larger community, friends that are back, places they want to go and revisit that they haven't seen in a while. So if you get the high and the buy, again, don't take it personally, because the old grab and go is a common phenomenon initially when students are excited to get up, get something to eat, and get out the door to go reorient to their larger home. We would say don't be completely available. It puts too much pressure on them if they think they need to be with you every minute of the day. Don't feel guilty about it either. They probably want some time just to chill, see friends, as we talked about, walk around the house or hang out in the pantry. So this can be hard since you might not have seen them in months, and it goes against the nature of being a parent, but you do have to keep the peace. So try not to speak too much or ask too many questions. And again, you'll be amazed at the snippets of information that come your way when you least expect them. And again, our students are used to sort of texting each other, and they probably text you, so it's easy to have sort of low-level conversation and still communicate a lot. And then lastly, we say, well, don't spoil them, but don't do everything for them. Don't underestimate the thrill of letting them get their own snack from the refrigerator, letting them do their own laundry, getting out and helping with summer chores, because helping out too much can make them feel like they're a guest in their own home. And unless you moved over the year, this is the home where they lived before they went to school. And then, of course, lastly, when the time is right, sneak in lots of hugs and kisses, and they're still your kids, and you all still can touch each other, and it's a good way to show our affections. So negotiations, let's talk a little bit about negotiations, and we keep hinting at that, about open dialogues and the balance between love and fear, and these are all negotiations that not only do we have with each other, but often we have to have these negotiations within ourselves. So after that initial stage is passed and we are adjusting, it's time to, again, have those negotiations we first hinted at. And again, it's not just your kid that has to do compromising. I'm sorry to have to tell you that, but it's not. This is a two-way street, especially if you're raising a young adult. These are adults now. So how do you negotiate with your returning young adult? Well, write down everything you can think of that might become a problem or annoyance. And don't ignore the little things because they build up. So if it is an annoyance to you to go into the kitchen and you find that there is 6 drops of milk in the carton that's back in the refrigerator, you can decide, you know what, that's not the battle I want to have. Or you might decide, like, yep, I can see how that's going to kind of build up for me, and that's something I have to negotiate. And then have your student do the same. They too can write down what they sort of think will become problems or annoyances as the summer presses on. And one of the first things you can do when they return home is to sit down together and co-create a list that can work for everyone. Again, that can feel a little contrived or like TV sitcom-ish, but a little planning ahead really can make a difference later on after people have begun to have feelings about things. Again, and this can eventually bring the whole family in on this discussion. And it's good to mold, if there are younger siblings, it's good to mold younger siblings and kind of having them model how you handle this with older siblings. Don't get caught up in making a list of demands that your kid must follow. Again, they're adults. They're coming home from having led their lives for an entire year, and your list of demands are just going to ratchet up tension. So believe it or not, your kids are now firmly in their young adulthood and have become accustomed to being treated as such. Everybody on campus will do this. So to have a healthily growing relationship with your child, you may need to take a hard look at who they are now, and they're not just your baby anymore. Be clear and succinct when you need to give feedback, such as please don't use the end of the toilet paper and not replace the roll. Depending on where your kids live, there may be maid service where bathrooms are cleaned for them and that sort of thing. So they may get out of the habit. So it's not them just being lazy and unthoughtful. They just adjusted to the environment that they're in, and they just need some time to adjust to the environment back at home. So again, walk away. Don't go on and on about it. Simply state what you need to state, period. Leave it be. because going on and chipping away at something and not letting it go often is going to lead to an argument and morph into an ancient argument that's been going on since they were 3 years old, when so-and-so failed to lock up their bike and it got stolen, and how could you be so careless and thoughtless? Practice reflective parenting rather than reactive parenting. All this revolves around communication, empathy, listening, turn-taking, and simply being judgment-free. One of my favorite quotes is from Ogden Nash, who said, "Parents were invented to make children happy by giving them something to ignore." So be aware that your kids are just being their kids. Ogden Nash sort of knew the dynamic. It's easy for us as parents to take it personally, but often it's just our kids being kids. The other thing we want to say is, often with all these warnings and rules and suggestions, it can begin to communicate like, well, this is not going to go well unless we really handle it. Your kid may come home and it may be the biggest, easiest breeze. It may be cutting warm butter. And so if that's the case, then nicely done. But if planning does need to happen, we hope that these tips are helpful to you. We also want to tell you a little bit about counseling services. We do offer counseling services on our campus. We do a lot of counseling on campus. Students are not shy anymore as they were when we were all students. There's very little stigma about counseling anymore. And so, again, the students are used to being talked about. They're used to speaking about their feelings and whatnot. Our services are available. They're broad. We see almost about 9% of the campus each year. So about 2,500 students a year come into the counseling service for students. We are happy to consult with you and your concerns for your student. However, again, students must make their own appointments. But if you are having concerns about your student, we want to remind you, you're our partner. You may be the first people to notice something going on. And so if you call us and say, I don't know if my student is seeing you or not, but I was concerned a little bit about this, I just wanted you to know, then that's information with your permission that we can take forward. We're located actually in several locations on campus. We're on the east side and west side of our river. We now have an east side location, as well as 3 embedded locations around campus. This is our webpage, and you can follow us on Facebook. We would love for you to do that, and you can also post there if you'd like. So that's it. If you have any questions, I will turn this back over to Lisa, who is our moderator, who can tell you how to do that.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Schreier, for all the great information.
Yay.
And all the tips and strategies, how to support students through the summer and into the future. Yeah. We'll now move into the question and answer portion of the webinar. So please keep in mind that our presenters are unable to answer questions about specifics on your student's experience, but you can provide information that may be helpful in guiding your student. If you have a question, type it into the question box on the side, the chat box. We will then read the question so all participants can hear, and then the presenter will answer the question. If we're unable to get to your question during the webinar, we will follow up with you via email. So we'll just take a quick 2-second break and see if we have any questions. That's good. Okay. Pace ourselves. Okay, let's do that.
Pace ourselves. What's the last line below? Pace ourselves and not smother him.
Yep, that's a good one. All right, you can turn it. It's on. Oh. Okay, so we have a question here. Our son is a student athlete, and his return is brief. He only gets to be home for a few weeks, and he wasn't really home for winter. So, and this is actually the case for a lot of our students who study abroad and do a lot of things. So do you have any advice for how we can pace ourselves and not smother him, but still enjoy having him around?
Yeah, I think a lot of the suggestions we get, thank you for the question. It's a really good question. And you're right, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Depending on who our students are and their roles on campus, their time home can change greatly. So I appreciate you giving attention to that. I think we get some really good ideas about that in terms of sort of the negotiation part. But additionally, I want to share this, and it's not something we said earlier, which is students often, because you're their parents, they're gonna. We call it the rule of unexplained variance. So if you talk to statisticians, they will say what research does is it tries to explain variance, like why did a thing happen? And any variance that can't be sort of explained gets explained against you, right? So if a rock fell and we don't know why a rock fell, we think, well, because somebody was careless. Unless we like, well, because there was a high wind, we sort of understood the variance. So our children can be like that with us as parents, is anything that's unexplained, they will explain against us. So if you say like, well, we just want to spend time with you because we love you and miss you, they will probably think, unless you explain yourself, they will think you're being smothering and over controlling and it's awful and terrible. So one of the things we often say to parents is explain your process. If you're asking them to do something because they're only home for a couple weeks, simply explain your process. We understand you're home for a couple of weeks. We're trying to find a balance so that you have your time. But because you're only home for a short time, I want to make sure I get time with you because we miss you. And so we want to figure out, what will work with your schedule. And there's a couple of things, your grandparents are coming, so we really want you home for that. And so explain your process, because anything that goes unexplained, your kids will explain against you. It's just the rule of unexplained variance.
So when my son came home for Christmas or winter break, he stayed in bed a lot, like he talked about. But how do I know the difference between sort of normal decompressing and maybe something that's more like depression or stress that I need to worry about?
Yep. So length of time becomes a critical thing. Our typical student, our average student they may not need to be in bed and be alone for any time at all. They may be excited to be home. Or what will happen is they will literally come home and they need some decompression time, and then it should pass. If it doesn't, if it seems to go on for more than just a couple of days, or if you start to see that it's becoming what we call more pervasive, it's not just staying in bed, they're not showering either, and they don't seem hungry, or they didn't even unpack anything, those kinds of things. So it's length that we get concerned about if it goes on too long, or if it starts to become more pervasive. It's not just that they wanted to sort of like catch up on sleep because they're sleep deprived from the last week, but their mood's different, they seem unkept, and these other sorts of things start to creep in. Then we become much more concerned. And at that point, if you are becoming much more concerned, then it may be a trip to your family doctor. If your child was in therapy previously, it might be a revisiting that. Or if you get really concerned, you certainly can give us a call at the counseling center here on campus, and we can always consult with you as a parent.
Do you have any advice it's not for my college students so much, but they have some younger siblings who need to readjust to them being back home. Do you have any advice how to talk to the younger ones about having the older one come home?
Yeah, it's similar. So you'll want to do some pre-planning. So depending on how young a sibling is, they may not be thinking about this. This may be way overly complex in terms of concept. And they're just excited and eager to see their older sibling who they may not have seen for a while. And so again, it might be explaining as simple terms as you can, depending again on the age of the younger siblings. Again, about expectations and how so-and-so needs to rest, and if they seem like they're being distant, and explain what feelings are about. If they seem like they're not paying attention to you, it could mean this. It doesn't mean that they don't love you or they're not interested in you. So again, it's pre-planning. It's helping explain what behaviors are about or reactions are about. And then once older sibling gets home, having conversation with them about how to be most planful so they can be attentive to younger siblings while also having their own time.
I want to jump in. I was the opposite. So my brother came home and it was awful. I think I had gotten used to him being gone, and I didn't want his attention. I kind of wanted him to just stay away. I was used to being a single child.
Only child, right?
So as a younger child, it was very hard when he would come home.
Yeah, I was similar. I'm the youngest of three, and when my brothers went away, it was glorious because I had the whole house to myself. And when they came back, it was fine. It just was not as glorious.
Yeah, I turned into a brat, according to my mother.
Yep, and again, that becomes a parental thing too. Is when older sibling comes home from school and younger sibling gets bent out of shape about it. It might be explaining that to older sibling. It's not that your younger sibling's not happy to see you. They just have sort of been rule of the roost for the last 6 months while you've been gone, and now they're going to have to share space with you again. So don't take it personally. It's just kind of how sibling negotiations have to go, and everybody's got to readjust. We kind of use a watch metaphor. If you sort of have ever opened the back of a watch or opened the back of a pocket watch, all those little wheels are in there, and they have to absolutely work together. If any one wheel gets off, all the other wheels have to adjust. Otherwise, the whole thing falls apart. And so we're all kind of wheels in a watch, which is all the wheels worked well, and then this new wheel showed back up, and all the wheels had to readjust. So it often can be that process.
Do you have any advice how to talk to my student about grades and majors without making them feel like I'm pushing?
No, I've not figured that out. That's a really difficult one. Approach your child with curiosity, right? Approach it with curiousness. Ask them about things. Often what happens is tone gets in there, whether you're having that tone or not, but tone gets in there. And so approach your student with curiosity. Tell me about this. Well, you mentioned you had partial interest in English. When you say partial, tell me more about that. What's that part? Rather than, well, an English major, do you think that's a good idea? Right? You can kind of tell the difference between that and, again, showing curiosity. Simply be curious with your children. This is the approach a lot of instructors take with them at school, and so they're used to it. So approach your kids with curiousness, and that can help keep a little bit of that tone out of it all.
Did the students get anything like this webinar about how to prepare to go home?
Heck no. No, we're trying to go to the most responsible people we can get our hands on, which is you all. There is a little bit of that. We do have opportunity to do that. So in the residence halls, sometimes what happens is the residence halls will post information to students saying, you're getting ready to go home, don't be a monster. Understand that your parents are having to readjust as well. But at least for the purposes of this webinar, we're sort of trying to go to the most responsible people we know, which is you all, to help your student with that, because they're really kind of the ones who are still learning and growing in a lot of ways. A great question. We should do a student webinar. That's actually a really good idea.
I don't remember. Can students access University Counseling Service over the summer if they're local?
Yep. So the counseling service is 365 days a year, except when the university is closed. And so if your student is on campus and would like to continue to use counseling services, they are eligible to do that as long as they're registered for the fall semester. Or we will have some students that are returning home but are within a drivable distance, and so they can check in through the summer. But your child, if they are already in college, will have negotiated that with the person they're working with about how service will continue in the summer or how service will end in the summer and pick back up again in the fall. But if your student wants to start services anew, again, we'll talk with them about how to negotiate that with the summer being upon us. But if they're here in town, yep, they are eligible for service, then it is available to them through the entirety of the summer.
Great. Last call for questions. I think we're kind of wrapping up with the questions I see. So if you have a question, now is the time to enter it.
I wanted to share another one of my favorite quotes was from Harry Truman. And Harry Truman said, "I have found the best way to give advice to children is to find out what they want and advise them to do it." So hopefully that'll be a little bit of a guiding rule for you as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We want to thank Dr. Barry Schreier again for joining us today. This and all webinars will be posted online at uc.uiowa.edu/family-resources. You can find it also on the parents.uiowa.edu website that you see on the slide right there. If you have additional questions that we did not get to today, they can be sent to uc-retention@uiowa.edu, and you'll get a response from a University of Iowa staff member. We will be taking a bit of a summer break with our webinars, but we'll be back in August, the first Friday in August. That's before school starts. And that first webinar will be all about Move In and On Iowa. So lots of great information if you have younger siblings coming in, or your students involved with On Iowa, or you have friends and neighbors who are sending students to Iowa for the first time. Tell them to check us out the first Friday in August. And also stay tuned for the schedule for the other webinars. If you missed them this year, we'll have some new ones next year potentially too. And check out parents.uiowa.edu for ongoing information. We hope you have a great summer. On Iowa, go Hawks!
Thank you.